Chapter 3. First phase of the Indian national movement. Introduction. The history of the Indian national movement can broadly be divided into three phases. 1. The early nationalist phase, 1885 to 1907. 2. The assertive phase, 1907 to 1916. And 3. The Gandhian era, 1915 to 1947. In this chapter, we shall study first phase of the Indian national movement, 1885 to 1907. Objectives and methods of struggle of the early nationalists. Any two contributions of Dadabhai Naoroji, Surendranath Banerjee and Gopal Krishna Gokhale. The early nationalists. In its initial years, the Congress was led by a group of leaders known as the early nationalists. The members of this group were drawn from the educated middle class, consisting of professionals like lawyers, barristers, teachers, and officials who drew inspiration from Western liberal and radical thought. Many of them were educated in England and felt that the British intended to be just to Indians, but they were unaware of the true state of affairs in India. Leaders. The early nationalists included leaders from all parts of the country as 1. W.C. Banerjee, Rasbihari Ghosh, Surendranath Banerjee, and R.C. Dutt from Bengal. 2. Dadabhai Naoroji, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, Firoz Shah Mehta, and Justice Ranade from Maharashtra and Gujarat. 3. P.R. Naidu, Subramanya Iyer, and Ananda Charlu from Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu. 4. Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya from Uttar Pradesh. 5. Liberal Englishmen like Hume and Wedderburn. The early nationalist leaders who led the Congress and the national movement in its initial years were staunch believers in open-minded and moderate politics. They believed in loyalty to the British Crown. B.C. Pal, an early nationalist leader, said in 1887, "I am loyal to the British government because with me, loyalty to the British government is identical with loyalty to my own people and my own country." They wanted that Indians should have their proper and legitimate share in the government. They asked for constitutional and other reforms within the framework of the British rule, as they had faith in the British sense of justice and fair play. They believed that continuation of the British connection with India was in the interest of both England and India. They concerned themselves with the demand for reforms. Their demands were moderate in nature.
अगर आप अपने सिलेबस के सारे चैप्टर्स इस फॉर्मेट में देखना चाहते हैं तो हमें डिस्क्रिप्शन में दिए गए नंबर पर कॉल करें.
Beliefs of the early nationalists. 1. The early nationalists had faith in the sense of justice, fair play, honesty, and integrity of the British. 2. It was their hope that the British would grant home rule to Indians. They relied on the solemn pledges made by the British government. 3. They believed that the British rule had many benefits. For example, it aided in cleansing social ills like sati, untouchability, and child marriage. 4. They were of the opinion that Britain would help Indians govern themselves according to Western standards. 5. They said that the main obstacle in India's progress was social and economic backwardness of Indians, and not the British colonial rule. 6. They relied on constitutional and peaceful methods to achieve their aims. They believed in patience and reconciliation rather than in violence and confrontation. Demands of the early nationalists. The demands of the early nationalists may be studied under the following heads. Constitutional reforms. The early nationalists wanted a larger share in the government of their country. They believed that eventually India should move towards democratic self-government. However, they did not ask for immediate achievement of their goal, as they feared that the government would suppress their activities. They, therefore, aimed at winning freedom through a gradual process. They made the following demands. First, abolition of Indian Council. Second, expansion of the Legislative Council and Legislative Assemblies, both at the centre and in the provinces. Third, increase in the membership of Indians by including some members elected by local bodies like chambers of commerce, universities, etc. in these councils, and by giving greater powers to them. They demanded Indian control over the public purse and raised the slogan, "No taxation without representation." Fourth, by the beginning of the 20th century, they made a demand for Swarajya, or self-government, within the British Empire, like the self-governing colonies of Canada and Australia. Fifth, adequate representation of Indians in the Executive Council of the Viceroy and those of the governors. 2. Economic reforms. The economic issues raised by the early nationalists included: first, reduction in land revenue and protection of peasants against unjust demands of the zamindars. Second, reduction in expenditure on the army and the money thus saved to be spent on welfare activities such as health and education. Third, an inquiry into India's growing poverty and famines. Fourth, availability of cheap credit to peasants through agricultural banks. Fifth, development of banking, irrigation, medical and health facilities for the people. Sixth, industrial growth through trade protection. That means that a heavy tax should be imposed on imported goods, and the government should give loans for the development of iron, coal, paper, and sugar industries in India. Seventh, total abolition of salt tax and the duty on sugar.
अगर आप अपने सिलेबस के सारे चैप्टर्स इस फॉर्मेट में देखना चाहते हैं तो हमें डिस्क्रिप्शन में दिए गए नंबर पर कॉल करें।
3. Administrative demands. The early nationalists made the following demands in the administrative sphere. First, demand for Indianization of services through simultaneous Indian civil service examinations in England and India. Second, complete separation of the executive and the judiciary. Why they made this demand is to protect Indians from the arbitrary acts of the police and the bureaucracy. Third, increase in the powers of the local, that is municipal bodies, and reduction of official control over them. Fourth, repeal of the Arms Act and License Act. Fifth, wider employment of Indians in the higher grades of administrative services. Sixth, spread of primary education among the masses. Seventh, improvement of the police system to make it honest, efficient, and popular. 4. Defense of civil rights. The early nationalists defended civil rights whenever the British government tried to curtail them. In fact, it was because of the political work done by the early nationalists that democratic ideas began to take root among Indians. The early nationalists demanded the following civil rights. First, removal of the restrictions imposed by the British government on the freedom of speech and the freedom of the press. Second, abolition of the Preventive Detention Act and restoration of individual liberties. Third, restoration of right to assemble and to form associations. The early nationalists were practical. They wanted to win freedom by a gradual process. They did not aim at high demands. because they wanted to work on the lines of least resistance. Besides, they did not want to arouse serious opposition. Methods of the early nationalists. The method, popularly known as constitutional agitation method, was followed by the early nationalists. They believed in the policy of constitutional agitation within the legal framework and slow, orderly political progression. The methods adopted by the early nationalists had two objectives. First set of methods and second set of methods. Let's see these in detail.
अगर आप अपने सिलेबस के सारे चैप्टर्स इस फॉर्मेट में देखना चाहते हैं तो हमें डिस्क्रिप्शन में दिए गए नंबर पर कॉल करें। ऐसे ही और एजुकेशनल वीडियोस देखने के लिए हमारे चैनल होम रिवाइज को सब्सक्राइब करें।